Police departments nationwide are under a microscope this summer, and now a piece of technology that some departments use is also coming under fire. That's facial recognition. NBC News technology correspondent Jacob Ward joins me now. And Jake, you spoke to a man who was wrongly arrested because of facial recognition technology. What happened to him?
Allison, it's an incredible story. This is perhaps the first known instance in which someone has been arrested because of facial recognition. And in this case, something that I'm sorry, when I say first known, I mean first known to have been wrongly arrested using facial recognition. Robert Williams, who lives just outside Detroit, basically came home and was put under arrest on his, front stoop, in front of his two young daughters, in front of his wife, simply because Detroit Police Department had used facial recognition to pick him out from an instance in which someone had shoplifted watches from a downtown boutique. He described to us what it was like to then see just how wrong they had gotten it once he had spent the night in jail, an innocent man spending the night in jail, being presented with what turned out to be a couple of blurry photographs and then a picture of his driver's license. Listen to what he said about what it's like to look at such inaccurate evidence.
I looked at the paper and it honestly made me chuckle. I said no, that's not me. So I picked that one up sarcastically and put it to my face. And I said, I hope you don't think all black people look alike, and dropped it back on the table. And he flipped the third piece of paper, irritated, and said, so I guess the computer got it wrong.
This is really the thing that tipped off his family, and then, they in turn reached out to the ACLU and retained counsel and figured out that he had, in fact, been grabbed because of a misidentification through facial recognition. Again, the first known time that this has happened, but an area of incredible concern as this technology takes off across the country, Allison.
Jake, what are police saying about this, and what actions, if any, are they taking?
The Detroit Police Department was working with a database at the time run by the Michigan State Police. And what's crazy about it is if you look at the investigation report, basically the search results that were given to the Detroit PD, it says across the top of it, this cannot be used as a cause for arrest. You have to develop other evidence. And yet that is exactly what the Detroit PD did. We spoke to the chief of police earlier today. Yeah. He says that this was an investigative mistake. That they definitely did not do this right, but that there are new policies in place that they will from now on only use facial recognition for violent crimes and home invasions, that every identification through facial recognition is going to require two experienced examiners to ratify it. But he did not want to throw the technology out with the bathwater. He says it can be useful. We heard this also from Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan. Saying this can be a useful thing. We just need new policies to make it happen. Of course, the ACLU does not feel that way, and other critics have said for a long time that this kind of technology is fraught with problems, Allison.
Jake, how about the companies that create facial recognition technology? What are they saying about its accuracy and how it's being used?
Well, the big companies that you and I have heard of, companies like Amazon, which make facial recognition systems and have sold them in the past to law enforcement, are taking a break from it right now. We have IBM, Microsoft, Amazon all saying that they're going to institute, self-impose a moratorium on selling it, in some cases at all, in the case of IBM, or to Amazon saying that they will pause on selling it to law enforcement for at least a year. This stuff is definitely taking a turn. The thing is, the companies that tend to serve law enforcement are companies we have never heard of. We were in contact with the company that made one of the algorithms involved in Mr. Williams' inaccurate arrest, a company called Rank1. And they say that, in fact, their technology has been benchmarked using federal standards as being highly accurate across races, but that this was misused, that you put too blurry a photograph in, one that even a human can't read, then the computer is not going to be able to read it otherwise. So, but the academics we speak to all say, this stuff cannot be trusted, that there's a long history of this technology misidentifying black people at a greater rate than other races. And as a result, we shouldn't be putting this kind of technology to use, certainly on a category of Americans that have been over-surveilled by police in the past, Allison.
Yeah. Jake, a bill addressing facial recognition technology was introduced in Congress on Thursday. What's in it?
Well, this is a really interesting development. Two Democratic senators have basically put forth a proposal that would ban the use of facial recognition by federal law enforcement. And not only that, they would also cut federal funding for state and local law enforcement if those law enforcement agencies continue to use facial recognition. So a very big move. You're seeing this at a time when San Francisco, the city I live in, Oakland, have banned it. Boston just this week said that they will ban it as well. In all cases, you know, there is obviously this sort of efficiency of law enforcement that this was promised to people on the basis of this. But as researchers have been pointing out for years, it doesn't play out that way, that even a perfect, technologically perfect version of this is rife for misuse. And so everyone seems to be stepping back, wanting to pull back, regulate it in some way. That's where this legislation is coming from. But in the meantime, you're seeing, you know, thousands of police departments across the country making their own rules, buying this stuff from companies we've never heard of, and in this case, arresting the wrong man, Allison.
All right, Jake Ward, quite a story. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
A powerful protest and vigil in Tucson, Arizona. Hundreds of people there demanding change last night after a video was released showing police restraining Carlos Ingram Lopez. He died in police custody back on April 21st. Body cam footage shows 3 officers restraining the 27-year-old. Ingram Lopez pleads for water and says that he can't breathe. An internal report says that he was handcuffed and held down for about 12 minutes. Now, those 3 officers involved have resigned, and earlier this week, the police chief also offered his resignation, but the city rejected it. NBC News reporter VAUGHN Hillyard joins me now from Tucson. And VAUGHN, first, why did it take more than 2 months for the police to make this video public?
I asked the mayor that this morning, Mayor Regina Romero, that very question as to why it took these 2 months. His passing was in the early morning hours of April 21st. And it was not until this week that this body camera footage came forward in the resignation of these 3 officers and us having this conversation right now. I want to let you hear the mayor's response when I asked her that question.
I feel just as the community does. I don't think it is acceptable. As a matter of fact, I put at the table for my colleagues on the council to immediately do a very quick reform related to this, which is any in-custody death at the hands of TPD must be released to the community and mayor and council within the first 24 hours. We do this already with officer-involved shootings, and we could do the same with situations of in-custody death. It has to be done.
I think it's important to understand the context of what can be seen in that police camera footage, and that is that the grandmother of this gentleman called up the police, and the police showed up on site in the early morning hours of April 21st, and they found a man that was clearly excited. He was naked. He had cocaine in his system. And that is when they found this man in the garage. And at that very moment, he said he was sorry and essentially willed himself to let the officers, do as they please with him. And that is when they put him onto his chest and they began to try to handcuff him. And he squirmed around. And over the course of those next 12 minutes, he continued to lay on his chest. And I think that's where the tough part of this video can be heard throughout, where he repeatedly asks for water. He says, "I can't breathe." He calls out for his grandmother. And over the course of those 12 to 14 minutes, the man is clearly in a vulnerable position. They put a blanket over him. And at that point, 14 minutes in, is when the officers realized that he had stopped breathing, and he died right there on the scene. I want to read part of the Tucson Police Department's own investigation that led to the resignation of these 3 officers. It said in part that these officers provided, quote, "a complete disregard for the training and showed an apparent indifference or inability to recognize an individual in medical distress." The man was never apparently given water, and obviously this man in distress who was calling out for help at that moment, none of these officers responded, which led to that resignation. And that is where you heard last night at that vigil these family members saying that they want justice on behalf of this individual, and they want action from within this police department.
VAUGHN, do we have any sense of whether we could see charges here? And could you tell us why the chief's resignation was denied?
Yeah, I mean, take into account here, this 27-year-old Carlos Adrian Ingram Lopez, 27 years old. He's a father of a 2-year-old, a son and a grandson. And it was actually these family members last night that said that they did not want the police chief to resign because they viewed it as a way for him to run away from what happened without taking an accountability within this very office. This now goes to the county attorney's office on whether, as part of a criminal investigation, into whether these 3 officers should be charged in the death of this individual. And there's a lot of question marks about that because in the autopsy report, it was determined that there was no clear determination for cause of death. I want to read you part of it if I could, because there was some frustration among some in the community on the focus that this man clearly was intoxicated. And they said, but if it weren't for, you know, the whole part of this comes down to, you call 911 for help. And they say that their son, their grandson, the father, he did not receive help. He was killed on the spot. And in that report from the Pima County Medical Examiner's Office, it says the cause of death is ascribed to sudden cardiac arrest in the setting of acute cocaine intoxication and physical restraint. It also mentions a heart defect that he had. All of these were significant contributing conditions, but the manner of death is undetermined. In that autopsy report, abrasions were noted in that autopsy report as part of the restraint over that course of that 12 to 14 minutes. And that's sort of where the question mark goes as to what happens to those 3 officers from here.
Yeah, Vaughn, we've just been looking at images, and you see a father, a son. It's really just heartbreaking. Vaughn Hillyard, thanks so much for your reporting.
Thanks, my friend.
Hey, NBC News fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.